Thank you. I'm Derek Christensen. I'm the Director for Cybersecurity Operations at the Postal Service. My role in this was co-lead for the CISO group for the Project T rollout. That's what we called it internally for our secret name when we were first developing it. And leading the threat response and detection efforts after we did roll it out.
Cool, and I'm Dennis Wayne with Accenture Federal Services, where I lead our cloud capabilities across our civilian portfolio. I also support the Postal Service on a number of different projects, this being one. So in the context of this project, my role was, I was the lead architect, and I led the application development team that built all of the ordering website and components that were in AWS.
Yeah. So who saw the keynote yesterday that Preetham Mehra, our CIO, gave, right? Okay. Everyone order their test kits in?
Yeah.
Everyone go back and order their test kits again? It's open again? Okay, just making sure. Okay, so this was a short-lived project. Well, not short-lived, it was a short-conceived project. And we're going to get into how we designed it, how we went through the process, how we were able to use AWS in this rollout, and some of the design mechanisms around it.
Cool. So as far as agenda, some of this will be a little bit of a rehash from the keynote yesterday, but we're going to go a little deeper on some of the actual moving parts in the application, talk about some of the monitoring that was stood up in place and put in place before the application launched, and get into, like, we're going to try and look at everything from a security lens in this talk. There were a lot of moving pieces to this project, but for this one, we're going to focus on some of the how we secured it, how we layered on security given the parameters we had and the time that we had. So as far as project goals, huge ask, right? It came in 500 million test kits to the nation. The request came in the day after Christmas, so it was not, great timing. Everybody's out of the office. Total kind of scramble, and by the way, we want to launch mid-January, so 2 to 3 weeks, massive ask. What are we going to do? We also knew, with the ordering site being the focus, huge volumes that we had to prepare for. We were prepping for, you may have heard Preetha say that the 20 million in an hour. There were guesses and swags all over the place. I think we wound up performance testing 25 million pretty comfortably. We had it set so it could be more if we needed it to be more, but there was a huge focus on this site can't crash. We don't want another kind of story, like, I'm not going to name past projects, but we didn't want any sort of story like that. I know Preetha showed the slide of CIO fired because website crashes, and she wasn't the only one feeling that, like, across the board on the teams below her. Everyone was pretty focused on making sure the site stayed up. So from an application standpoint, really this is kind of high level, just wanted to go through, like, what the moving parts were. We really focused on simple. So from a design perspective, get people in, get people out, get them a kit, right? We wanted to take any bells and whistles or extra things out of the equation. We actually did bring in some folks that were part of the healthcare.gov project for perspective on, hey, what did a national rollout look like for you guys, and what were some of the pitfalls, and how do we make sure we're careful around that. So the front end website, we knew from the start we wanted it to be static pages. We wanted to use CloudFront. We wanted it coming out of cache, right? We didn't want to have anything heavy. We did talk about user registration, and wouldn't it be nice if we could register everyone as a postal customer? But given the mission, it was really that's too cumbersome. Just keep it very simple. And so that was CloudFront, and we used Web Application Firewall with CloudFront as our primary security service there for the actual site itself. And then the back end was we really once we knew, we knew the site would scale, being cached in CloudFront. So we kind of shifted our focus to, okay, now when somebody hits submit, it places an order, it's hitting the API. That is where we spend a lot of our time making sure this API has to scale. We have to bulletproof this thing, error handle, like everything has to be really, really efficient, really performant. So we used API Gateway as the primary interface. Again, web application firewall for some of our security on it. Everything else was running in OpenShift. And we focused a lot of our energy on like what is the bare minimum amount of work that needs to be done by the real-time processing, and then what is everything else. So you can see there within OpenShift and EC2, all of the moving parts were in containers, and it was basically real-time. We needed to validate the address, which was an external web service call. So we were going out and hitting a public API that the Postal Service has available. Check to see if they've already ordered, and that was Redis cache lookup, key value, very simple. Has this household already ordered a kit? And then put it on a Kafka, and everything else is after the fact, near real time. And that included confirmation email, persisting the data to RDS for reporting, and generating files to go to downstream systems. So this is kind of the high level. These are the things that had to happen. It doesn't sound like a lot of functionality, but my gosh, it was hectic. Last minute changes. We want to add, certain logic for, prioritizing orders for areas in need. And so there was actually a lot under the scene, like under the hood, going as far as the processing went as the orders were coming in. We also really played around a lot with scaling it out so that even though we had these asynchronous processes, we were trying to get them scaled and tuned to be running as closely as possible to the orders coming in. So we wanted emails going out near real time. We wanted database getting updated near real time. So on the back end, we were trying to scale out all of those pieces so that everything was not bumping into any throttles or limitations, but also keeping up with the volumes that were coming in.
So when we started this project, a lot of the key considerations that we had, right? This thing is open to the world. We're trying to be as open to everyone ordering and getting a test kit as possible. We wanted to make it as simple as possible because of that. So you talked about the registration aspect, and when we looked at that, that added that level of complexity that was just not doable in the time frame that we had to maintain and to adjust for the order volume they were looking for. So we went with the guest checkout only process, right? So we wanted to make sure that there was a process in place. So it wasn't just a one-click, we had a two-click process, and that way we can get an email back to everyone and give you an order number that you could track through the postal network to track your shipment, right? So of course, then we went to the static edge. So we were able to put the first page up that everyone saw, well, both pages actually, and you weren't touching anything in the back end like we were talking about. We'll talk about that a little bit more, and we're relying on that API gateway in order to consume all the orders coming in. The tightly controlled rollout. So we partnered very closely with the White House and HHS on this project. So they were our two biggest partners in this entire conversation. So we had there was a lot of secrecy around it at the very beginning. Slowly expanded out as you started adding more and more people. As Preetha mentioned at the keynote yesterday, we worked heavily on our environment as well. So we were doing an on-prem solution, trying to figure out how we could potentially do that and utilize some of our already built custom store, USPS store mechanisms. But then, as she said, we realized that that wasn't going to handle the volume. So we had to go to the cloud option. We knew we had a high likelihood of attack, right? So being the paranoid operations director that I am, we knew that, hey, someone may think that this is a great thing to show someone up, right? So we always had to be concerned about that. So we're always designing the site so that we could ensure that we had the most security, best security possible. And that was actually a key function that we were able to design it with very harsh restrictions at the very beginning of it, right? So we were allowed to be very restrictive and closed off, and we'll talk about that in the next slide a little bit more. And then one of the last things that is very important, so we knew that this is a huge high-vis project. We knew we were going to have an audit. It's already in place right now, our OIG. So we did everything by the book, and we expedited our ATO process. Our risk team, who does our accreditation work, they moved mountains to get through the accreditation process effectively and appropriately to our processes.
Yeah, which I'd add, a 3-week turnaround, doing everything by the book is a lot harder than you would realize, right? There's a lot of process, a lot of documentation, things not set up in some of the systems that are used for tracking. So that was really kind of almost its own separate kind of work thread that we had to really be pretty diligent about. And the other thing I'd add is just that guest checkout decision, right, that was really big. That was, a lot of the protection that comes with, I know the customer, I've validated their email address, they've gone through some kind of sign up, all of that goes out the window. And so now we're looking at this like, wow, we're, naked in front of the world. Let's figure out how we layer on some security to protect this thing, because we did not have that sort of, user authentication available for this project. Cool, so on this one, so this is a little bit deeper. I'm gonna give a quick description. We're gonna try and focus in, I know there's a lot of things on here. We're gonna focus in on some of the security services and aspects. But this is really what our AWS architecture looked like. And you can see there, like number 3, where we have OpenShift on EC2, is almost its own separate architecture. You could, we have another diagram, not in this presentation, that's basically what's running inside of that, and it's almost its own architecture with Kafka topics and containers running consumer processes and doing various things. This one is the outside view of all of the moving parts from an AWS perspective. And we're going to go through some of the highlights here. I don't know, Derek, you want to?
Yeah, so we're setting up the security, right? So obviously the WAF, right? This is a key component at the front end on the static site. We also had the WAF in front of the API gateway as well. So having that level of security, we used out-of-the-box rule sets from AWS. I gotta admit there were some really good rule sets. It really helped us out because it was a nice, secure environment. We were able to build some good dashboards. We had geospatial blocking in place. We had bot protection. We had rate limiting. We were limiting the request body size as well. So all those things that you normally do. Now, I will say that now we have some stories because some of those things that we did actually caused some issues when we did do our launch, right? So when we did a soft launch the week before, where USPS customers, we tested out the site, or USPS employees, I apologize. We tested out the site. We spent a couple of days doing this. Well, we actually hit the rate limit because we were all ordering from the network, our internal network, and our web proxy was showing up as the only thing ordering all these test kits. And so we were blocking ourselves from being able to order and get a positive feedback from the email responses. Yeah, some people may have done that before, yeah.
I almost had a heart attack.
Yeah.
It was literally like, everybody hit submit, and it was like, it's spinning, like, what, oh my God,
Yeah,
like, this is crazy.
That was good fun. Later on, within that first week after we launched, we had to reduce our geospatial limits because our thought process was the overseas employees, the citizens would be, going through the embassy, going through the military bases to order. Well, it's time of COVID, and not everyone was back at work. So they're actually ordering from their homes overseas. So now we had to remove those geospatial blocks so that we could allow our overseas citizens to be able to order the test kits as well. And then the last one, which I think Dennis, I agree, is one of the more interesting aspects. We were blocking Instagram, right? We couldn't figure out why the Instagram words weren't going out because the links were going through Instagram. Turns out there was a reference tag inside of the Instagram headers set to 0, so it didn't come through as a web browser. And so we were blocking that. So we had to change our rule sets in order to accommodate the Instagram, because rule number 1 was a secure site. Rule number 2 was get the test kits out as fast and to as anyone that was eligible to receive the test kits. So then we go into the API gateway, had the JSON validation, validating the keys as well. The AWS Guard Duty and Shield, of course, for our threat detection. We'll talk about that in a couple slides as well, a little more how we handled that. We had another story. I'm going to actually let Dennis tell this one about the least privilege.
Yeah, so this is one, I mean, where, again, focusing on doing everything by the book, we were really strict with our IAM privileges, a lot of read-only, least privilege is very important. We actually, there was a failover plan that had snapshots of the Redis cache where, that basically was tracking how many orders has a household made, and so we were snapshotting that to S3 as a backup and to also share with one of the failover options. So we provisioned access keys to be able to get to that backup of Redis, and they were pulling it in. So you fast forward, we get this alert from Amazon that said, hey, your access keys have been compromised. So we didn't even know that Amazon did this, but they actually they have crawlers that go through public GitHub repos, and they had identified access keys in a public GitHub repo that a third party had accidentally published, and they immediately quarantined the user. We were able to very quickly see, okay, nothing was compromised. The quarantine came in before we actually did start getting some attempts where queries were coming in, trying to do EC2 describe, trying to do a couple of different things that were definitely not coming from the partner that we were working with on that failover. But thankfully, not only had it already been quarantined like the IAM user, but the privileges were so limited that they really couldn't have done. They would have had to know exactly what they could do, and basically guess that they could do a very specific object get in S3. So it wound up being a non-issue, but it was because of proper design. Really, is what came down what it came down to.
Yeah, and a couple more lessons learned. So we had to adjust the rule sets as we went along, right? So like I said, we were very restrictive at the beginning, and we had issues. We actually ended up with a loop in between the two WAFs, between the API WAF and the CloudFront WAF, that we ended up having some issues with having to change the exceptions and customizing the rule sets inside the two WAF protocols. So that was a good lessons learned for us. And then, like I said, we're being as restrictive from a security standpoint, but not being restrictive on the order standpoint. So we had to find that right line, and it took us a couple of days, but a lot of good communication through the teams and our partners of making sure that everything was working properly.
Yeah, I would say, a lot of our time was just spent, the rule sets in WAF were super helpful, but also it was an area where really hard to test, especially, Derek mentioned earlier the sort of veiled rollout, right? The White House didn't announce, here's when we're opening it up. They had an internal to postal only rollout to production, followed by equity partners where we were using header filters to make sure that you were coming through the equity partner, followed by quietly open up to the nation, and nothing could really get out, which made testing our WAF rule sets pretty difficult, right? And we just also, it's hard to anticipate Instagram has a problem because of this header thing, and so that was definitely a takeaway of something public facing like this. There's there will be lessons learned adjusting your rule sets, and it's also an area worth putting some time into to make sure you're ready for everything that's going to come in.
Yeah, I think that another valuable lesson learned, we've talked about Twitter. So who remembers if they saw this on Twitter, the USPS site first before any other notifications? So we had that soft opening like Dennis mentioned. We didn't expect it to catch fire, but someone found it, posted it on Twitter, and within minutes, our traffic spiked on the site, right? And we weren't even technically open yet. So then we had to go through some procedures to announce it and work with our partners on that. But Twitter caused a huge push and surge into our environment that very first day. So luckily we were ready to go, not waiting for the next day.
Yeah, we didn't anticipate it. Thankfully, it was already all hands on deck, but man, did it take off quick.
Yes.
Some other aspects just to talk about, so you can see, I know it's fairly light, but the subnetting. So we were really careful with, I mean, because this is open to the public access, we really made sure we focused on network segmentation. And what you can see there, so like where we have that OpenShift cluster number 3 is in a public subnet. There's no connectivity back to the actual USPS network directly. That was deliberate. What we were actually doing, you can see that number 8 where we have EFS. So what we did is we used a shared file storage. We mounted persistent volumes to OpenShift, and we also used that same storage to attach it to what you see on the right there, which is AFT Gateway, which is a postal proprietary file transfer software. And so we actually used that shared mount point to give that gateway access to the files that were being created asynchronously. And then really the only direct path onto the postal network was with the ports used by that software to send the files downstream. So it was very, very carefully walled off, just not knowing what was going to come in the front door. We put a lot of thought into how do we make sure the least, we minimize network traffic paths into the postal network. And that actually, it worked really, really well. One thing to call out there is that because we did it that way, anyone coming from the postal network couldn't reach OpenShift, couldn't get to some of the moving parts of the app. And so you could see where we have Amazon Workspaces, that was really how we handled that aspect. So we had our operations and development teams all set up on Workspaces running within that subnet so that they could get access to everything, and then everything else was walled off. And it actually worked very, very effectively. We were able to operate. I mean, we had it stood up. I mean, we only had 3 weeks total, so we had it stood up very quickly, and we're working that very quickly. I think the other thing that came out that was kind of funny, it was a funny workaround where we had we were using Oracle RDS for persisting the data, and we had a bunch of dashboards, and we used QuickSight on top of that. But we had a bunch of requests coming from folks in different groups on-premise that wanted to access the data for their own internal dashboards or for other systems, and there were all these kind of use cases coming out of the woodworks that were like, hey, we need to get to this database. And so we didn't want to punch a hole into the public subnets. What we actually did was we just created a read replica in that private VPC and then just opened up access through the Direct Connect to get to the replica. So now we have the data being available, but not actually having any sort of hole that we drilled through from the public subnet. So pretty carefully done, very much a focus, just not knowing really what sort of whether or not we're going to get some kind of attack or what sort of things might happen once we were out there nationally.
Okay, so now that we have the structure and design, then they turn to me and they go, how are we going to monitor this, right? Well, me and the other network monitoring component of the CIO group. So we set about setting up our monitoring dashboards using our CloudWatch. We're using it to monitor the health and comfort of the system, making sure it's staying up, making sure that we're not seeing too many spikes of this or that and everything is working right. And then the security monitoring using the threat intel dashboards. We'd had a lot of great partnership between us, Accenture, and AWS in standing up those dashboards. We had about 3 days to really get our feet under us, get the training in place, and be up and monitoring. It was a huge effort by my team and by our partners in getting that effective, right? Because Tuesday, the day of launch, right, I could sit there and monitor the dashboards, and we had a good vision of what was going on and being able to tell where the hiccups were. And we actually did have a hiccup. We can talk about that now. I'm going to let Dennis tell this hiccup. Where we're monitoring, we noticed this little blip once an hour.
Yeah, and first I do want to say there's a special thanks to the Amazon folks on the dashboards, just real quick, because we're in the thick of app dev, trying to hit the deadline, making sure everything's scaling, performance testing. And it's like, he mentioned that the 3 days before rollout, and it wasn't just how are we monitoring it? It's what are we showing to the folks at the White House to show, there was a ton of visibility. Where's our dashboard for the Postmaster General? Where's our dashboard for there was a lot of eyes on this, and the Amazon folks brought in ProServe, came with canned dashboards and really took on a lot of that because we just did not have the bandwidth on the app dev team. So that was really key. So the story that Derek's alluding to, it's funny once you put all this monitoring in place. It was one of those like I can't believe that's happening type of thing that came out. So we're in the thick of it. Millions of orders are coming in through the site, and we have this dashboard that's monitoring API latency. And part of the synchronous process I mentioned earlier was this address validation call where we go out to an external API and it comes back, and in testing, sub-second, usually around half a second, pretty rapid response. Every 2 hours, there's a minute period where it would spike. Huge latencies, we'd get 500 errors. And you'd see the traffic, you'd see about 500 errors, so, anyone who submitted right then would get an error message, please try again, and then right outside that minute window, you see a big spike of successful orders because everybody, hit submit again, and it just went through. And we could not figure out, what the heck is going on? It was driving us nuts, right? It was the only source of 500 errors. We were packet tracing out through the NAT gateway. We were calling everyone, all the different groups. Everybody's pointing fingers, the downstream system. What we wound up finding is that an MTIPS service sitting in front of Postal, so we're hitting this address validation API. We're on a call, and I'm not going to mention any of the parties involved, but on there, it was like, hey, this is weird. It's every 2 hours. Is there anything scheduled? And one of the folks, part of the MTIPS team, says, oh yeah, well, we do this security update every 2 hours, but I doubt it's that. And it's like, you got to be kidding me, right? So we take a look, and sure enough, we're like, all right, when's the next one? And it happened to be maybe 5 minutes before we knew, we know exactly what time this spike is going to happen. So we're all watching. And sure enough, the security update runs across the whole MTIPS, all servers on the MTIPS service at the same time, and severs traffic. So anything that was inbound to the Postal network at that time, severed during that minute, and then opened back up. And we made an adjustment on the patch, the auto patching cycle. Obviously killed the every 2 hours, changed it to, I forget what it was. It was every Sunday at off hours time, and lo and behold, there goes our latency spike and our 500 errors. And that was, it was one of those things where never would have found it without this sort of set of dashboards, without this sort of eyes on dashboards trying to figure it out. Because, on the Postal side, on the on-premise, they have great monitoring, but all it looks like is a dip in traffic coming in, because it's never actually hitting their network. So it's literally just every 2 hours for about a minute, traffic looks like a dip. So unless you're really paying attention, you're not going to know that was happening. So it was a really interesting one of those wow, never would have guessed that kind of moments that was only possible through all of the operational monitoring we put in place.
Thanks. I could never have said all that. So we also integrated our Splunk instance with CloudWatch, so we were able to pull down some logs to monitor for. And the last thing, as I mentioned, we had over 300 team members from the Postal Service that were monitoring this, whether it's network performance or security. We're doing 24/7 shifts for I think the first couple months was just everyone was paying attention to this. Now we're in phase 3. We're still monitoring, we're still doing the rollout, but you can go back in and order some more test kits. I'm going to pitch that a few more times and drive up.
I would just say on that last part, it was amazing. I've worked with the Postal Service for years. This was every group across the entire organization coming together for mission. People ramped up in days, 24/7. I don't even know all the different teams. Everybody had their own dashboard. We're looking at their own thing, knew who to call. It was pretty wild.
So our last thing that fell into my lap was fraud, right? So one of the first requirements we had was one order to one household, right? So Of course, that's a problem because, you get 2 or 3 people in a household that would order the test kits, not talking to each other, just go on and order, and they would get the error message back that you couldn't get it or that it's already been ordered. But we had a lot of people that decided to figure out how to work around the system. Anyone that's dealt with fraud can attest to that you're always going to have people out there looking for ways to try and get more. We're concerned about hoarding, of course. We didn't want people grabbing them and then trying to sell them for money, right, since these were free. And then any other numbers of issues. So we already had a fraud effort that was under my group, and we got them looking at this, and we were able to get the data out of the system to identify those additional orders so that we could stop the orders from being processed in our system. Some of the issues that we found, so street walking, it's not the bad version. It's people were ordering for their entire street or just ordering for the street itself to think that they can go and grab it out of the mailbox. That's a West African mail theft issue. They would order and steal from the mailboxes, so we're concerned about that. So we would identify short orders from the same email address, same IP address, or the time frame for the houses. There's usually no way a whole street of 30 or 40 houses we're going to order within the same 30-minute window. There was a lot of profane and political language, still is, that would be added on there. We had a person who was ordering for their entire neighborhood and saying some pretty ugly things to their neighbors as the first and last name from the order standpoint. And then we had our multi-unit and single-family home discrepancies. So we still see this to today. You'll have a single-family home, and you'll get 50 orders for that one house. And then we're like, well, that's not possible. And then we go and validate that's a single-family home, and we would kill the order. So, but there were all sorts of ways that they were circumventing it through the system. And the best thing about that is we've evolved, right? So now we're blocking at the front end some keywords and designations that we've gathered over the course of this evolution so that we can stop it without having to do the process on the back end. So, and we're continuously adding to that list today.
Yeah, and I would add on the Evolve software, it's kind of interesting. It's wanted to definitely call out. This is a bit of a feather in the postal cap. You heard Preetha talk yesterday about next day delivery of test kits, and once they had the inventory, they got really efficient, and you saw some of that in her keynote. So orders were coming in, and later rounds, once the inventory had been prepped, they were getting fulfilled so fast that it was difficult for Derek's team to actually block fraudulent orders before it was getting out the door. Whereas when there were inventory gaps, there was a little bit more of a buffer to actually review orders and stop them. And so we actually had to make software changes to enable that a little bit better, just because the delivery efficiencies were outpacing the ability to review and stop orders, which was kind of interesting. Yeah, and so really that covers it. I think where we stand, right? Our mission was make sure everyone gets a kit, make sure the site doesn't crash, and I loved looking at some of the tweets that were going out and some of the sentiment at its peak, or I think to date we're over, gosh, it's probably higher than 98 million is the number I have right now, but even that's probably
it's over
a little out of date because the orders are just continuing to come in. But on our peak launch day, it was 44 million orders on that day and 54 million orders within 2 days, which was incredible. It was 8.7 million orders in an hour was the highest that we got. And we definitely, as big as that number is, we had headroom. We were feeling really good about, bring it on Twitter, like we're ready to go. We can handle even more than this.
Still have a hard time believing that 8.7 number, by the way. It still boggles the mind when you think how many orders that came in that 1 hour. So
yeah, and so and the response was very positive. There were positive tweets. There were a lot positive reactions. There was, I mean, obviously a hiccup or two here and there with some of the data, some of the validations, but overall, I think, you know, I think we feel like the nation was well served by the Postal Service. And with that, I think we're at time, so we definitely have time for any Q&A if there are questions. Sure.
You guys mentioned it was such a high-profile project, or probably auditing involved.
So you guys mentioned since it was such a high-profile project, there would probably be auditing involved. Can you talk about some of the architectural decisions you had to make that kind of reflected that constraint?
Yeah, I can start. So from an architecture standpoint, I mean, a lot of what we focused on more was documentation, really focused on change. So it really looks and seems simple, the site, but there were some back-end pieces constantly changing. There were, I mean, just changing the text on the front end was very, because of the level of oversight on it, like we had to be really careful with, it's this exact language, it needs to get approved by this group. So all of the software changes were, I mean, we spent a lot of time focusing on dotting all the I's, crossing all the T's for that. Outside of that, a pretty good, you know, we're using containers, so we have the base container images and have that scannable. Postal has infrastructure for scanning code. So we have code scan results, and then likewise for nodes, we had, you know, very clean AMI list and scans that were performed across the nodes. So those are the big parts, and then also from an IAM perspective, over 300 users in a handful of days, meticulously reviewed and approved who needs access to what, right? And that was, yeah, you were front line of that one.
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, those are some of the things. And what made it a little more challenging is because it was only a 3-week turnaround, some of the systems that Postal already has in place that do some of this for you, we were not able to set those up. So we had to do some of it, you know, by hand, like, you know, literally tracking email approvals and things like that and making sure we had the right trail and the right group of folks looking at everything. Anything you'd add? I don't know.
Yeah, from the auditing standpoint, for us, it was mostly just documenting what we did. I don't think there was any decisions made to change the environment because of the audit. It was just basically just documenting our decisions and making sure that we can support any of those decisions when we go through the audit process.
Yeah, there's a lot of process already in place, but it was creating the trail to demonstrate process was followed.
Yep.
Which was.
Any other questions?
In the hindsight, what would you do differently? In the
Take longer?
Yeah, I would have loved some more time. I'm not gonna lie. The hours that we were working were pretty insane. I do think what, you know, talking about some of the WAF rules, I do wish we had a little more time to do some testing there, and we definitely have learned some lessons. So if we did it all over again, our rule sets would be pretty airtight. We wouldn't have Instagram problems or custom exceptions out of blocks. You know, some of the things that caused us a little bit of pain. So definitely some aspects of that. But on this one, I really think from an architecture standpoint, from a how is it going to scale, how are we going to maintain the uptime, I wouldn't change much. It was pretty robust. Like I said, we had headroom. We could have gone to, you know, like the way we were scaling out OpenShift, it was like, what do you want the throughput to be? You know, like, you know, until we hit a hard limit on something, like we could just keep going wider, which was fantastic. I guess in retrospect, we didn't get to multi-region. We talked about it. It would have been nice if we had regional failover, but we didn't have that. But there was, you know, Preetha mentioned in her keynote, there was another provider that had a solution that was also, that there were multiple levels of redundancy on other platforms and on-premise. So it's not like we were without an option. It's just, you know, we probably would have gone with multi-region out of the gates if we had a little more time.
Yeah, I think time's really the big, for the 3-week poll that we did, thinking back on it, I can't think of any real spot where I think we had any major stumbling blocks because everyone just drove to it, and the simplicity of what we were able to achieve, I think is, and simplicity being a very relative term, but that really just, if we had a few more weeks, it would have been better potentially, but I think that with the site and what we've done and what we were able to accomplish, I think we did a really great job with all facets here.
Oh, and I would have moved it away from the holidays. Assembling a team, you know, the day after Christmas, for
Yeah.
this, that sucked. Like making the
There-
phone call of like, hey, you're out.
There were people on vacation,
Let
and
me drop this bomb on you. Yeah, right.
there's another question back there.
This is very interesting. Can you explain how like code would be deployed? Like, was there a staging environment, like in the infrastructure diagram? Like, what's the origin that you use for CloudFront? Like, how does that part happen?
Yeah, so we had a staging environment. We had a separate, we did deploy everything from, we had separate DNS for that staging site. We also, you know, from a CloudFront origin, it was all S3 static pages. From a code perspective, we did have a GitHub repo as part of, you know, the Postal Service has an enterprise build system that it's already kind of pre-wired with several different code scan tools. And so a lot of it was reused from existing projects. If I look back at this, a big part of how did we get this up and running in 3 weeks is we reused, there's a program called the Package Platform, uses OpenShift, has some shared frameworks for parallelization using Akka, has some baseline container images, some baseline AMI. So we reused a lot of stuff that had already been hardened and proven in production, along with the tools and process that go with, you know, making the software changes that were specific for the program. So thankfully we were not starting from scratch. I think we would have been dead if we were starting from scratch. There was a lot that we were able to use.
Hi guys, thank you. So one thing you mentioned was the idea of layering on security, but it's always best, of course, to design from the security point of view in the first place. So did you guys, how did that work? Was it design security by design, or was it let's go back afterwards because we're in such a rush to get this thing going to actually put security on it?
Yeah, I mean, it was, go ahead. Oh, go ahead.
No,
yeah.
go ahead. You're at the front end of that.
Yeah, I was going to say it was a mix. So like we knew certain services, certain approaches, like we could secure it well, but something like the guest checkout, right? Like we didn't know day one. Like there were conversations going on and we're like, yeah, it'd be great if we could do user authentication and validate the email address. And then, you know, everybody talks about it. It's like, yeah, that's out. Like we can't go through that for this. So there was a lot that was fluid, but there were some core principles that we just, out of the gate, we knew WAF, right, was going to play a huge role. We were going to put it in front of the site and put it in front of the API gateway. Like we knew that right away. Some of the other parts were more evolve in kind of the flurry.
Yeah, and the decisions, when I said we were able to be as restrictive as possible, here's the WAF, and then we threw all the controls on and then had just barely a little trickle of things coming through, and then we loosened up from there. So while we didn't have a great security by design conversation at the front end because of the time frame, we were able to be very restrictive when we did our rule sets. So we didn't have a lot of complications at the beginning, and then we were able to loosen it for those scenarios that I discussed with the geospatial blocks and some of the other controls that we had to do to keep us from blocking other things in the environment.
Yeah, a similar story, like when I talked about the network segmentation, that was upfront. Like we know for sure that we're going to have a very limited path into the actual postal network. We very quickly designed in like we're going to use to share file storage for file transfer only, which limits, you know, there's not a whole lot you can hop to and get through. Like it's very controlled. So some of that was just right away. Here's how we're doing it. some of it was, very, very iterative.
So any interesting stories from what people tried to do to you guys? Because as you said, this was high profile.
Primarily, the fraud is the fun stories. We saw the normal internet activity when we opened up the geospatial blocks. We saw the normal bots and the normal kind of DDoS attempts, but we really didn't have any other weirdness. Really, the fraud stole the show. I will say that Preetha did enjoy some of the unfiltered conversations we had about what people were putting on the packages.
Yeah, there's some creative people out there.
Yeah, there are.
Using some of those fields for interesting
I
values.
didn't know you could put that much into the last name field at times. So
Yeah. And I would say, the only, we definitely have plenty of blocks, but nothing that constituted like this is a legit attack. But we also layered, we had shields set up, we had rule sets. Like we felt pretty good that if that happened, we were prepared.
Thank you. Excellent presentation. Question around version 2.0 of COVID tests. Do you think of baking any of that multi-factor authentication or anything to kind of double check that the individual ordering is a real person?
Boy, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Well, we'll see where it goes. I know this is a capability. You heard Preetha on the keynote stage. This is a capability that is moving into what they have. It's the USPS Connect for a whole host of localized shipping options, right? So this type of fulfillment of if it's easy, we can put a label on it and get it out the door, and some of the warehousing involved with that is, I think, something that's potentially kind of where it goes from a software features. I'm not really sure. This was very, very focused on, we need to nail the test kit, probably get these things out the door as fast as possible. So there are certainly plenty of options and different features that are being discussed. I don't know, where that's going at this point in time.
yeah, I'd say that we don't really have a use case yet for that. We've had multiple conversations around different aspects, but at this point, we're continuing to ship out the test kits with the original site, and we feel comfortable with what we currently have.
Cool. Well, if there's nothing else, thank you, and we'll be around, happy to talk. Thanks a lot.